to do is explain a little bit about this next section, this next part of proceedings. I have to my right Maddie Jago, the Director of Landscapes and Biodiversity, working for Natural England, and Becky Waite to my left, the Head of the Protected Landscapes team at DEFRA. We have had apologies from Peter Matthews, the Chair of Natural Resources Wales, but we did hope to have Wales represented here as well. I would say that the people sitting both sides of me are friends of Vale and Lees, been very helpful over the last few years. No buts, there's no buts there at all. This section, this part of proceedings will be hopefully be interactive. It's an opportunity for you to get engaged with discussion, to engage yourself with discussion. What we didn't want to do was continually run the same format for the way that we asked the more strategic parts of both organisations to interact with us. So we invited both Maddie and Becky as keynote listeners rather than keynote speakers. And the purpose of this, whilst we understood it's a deviation from normal practice, was to give both Maddie and Becky an opportunity to listen, to interact, to not have to go through the process of producing a formal presentation, but to really give, towards the end of the conference, their perspective on the way things have gone, the conversations they've picked up on, the feelings they've picked up on, the elephants in the room, the issues that people are having to deal with. So really that's what this session is. We've put aside until 12:30. If people feel that there is nothing more that needs to be said, we will move on. So it's very flexible. I'm going to ask a question of both people first, and then I'm going to hand it over to you. If there is nothing forthcoming from the floor, I shall ask more questions, and I will keep going until I feel they've both had enough.
I'll be able to tell.
I'll be able to tell whether they'll wilt and disappear below the level of the table. There is a roving mic, Jill's got a roving mic. But I think really from my first question is a very broad one, and I'll address it to Maddie first. There's been a lot of different issues raised over the course of the last few days. I would just like to hear Maddie's general thoughts on common themes, issues that have come to the fore. And on that note, I'll pass over the mic.
Thank you, Howard, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for staying for this bit. What a great invitation that Howard gave me to listen and to think. And one of the things that I really got from the conference, also talking to some of you, is that in our busy lives, we don't often have the opportunity to stop, to listen and to think and to step outside of the daily job. For me, that's one of the big take-home messages of the opportunities that we get from these gatherings. Probably the biggest opportunity, actually. And the other thing that particularly struck me was the diversity of the subject matter that we've been looking at. My job is limited in Natural England to landscape and biodiversity, and also to having a responsibility and a relationship with protected landscapes. What struck me from the conversations that we've listened to about freshwater resources, about coastal process and interactions, about the marine environment, is that many AOB partnerships are dealing with very, very diverse geographies, very, very diverse issues on the ground. And that is one of the challenges, one of the opportunities. So it's very striking, the diversity of presentations and contents that we've been listening to. And trying to actually come away with something tangible from a huge amount of information over 3 days. And I was just trying to think about some of what those sort of key responses and reactions were, very much from my point of view, but also having had some conversations with some of you. For me, some of it was about the fact that geography and place really matters. And that's something that the AOB partnerships really bring to this complexity. So it's both about the very local, but it's also about that landscape scale, that some of those bigger join-ups that we need to make. And we heard some of these issues and the importance of both the local scale, but also making connections with some of the wider issues. So that was one of the points that came across more than once across different presentations across the days. We also started to have some very good doses of reality. And reality is, I think, a very good thing. Some of it was about how this actually affects real people on the ground. It was about the fact that, and one of the opportunities, I think, is that people largely understand the dependencies of society on water. It's not one of those really difficult, intangible things. So there's something really useful for us to hang on to, that people get water. They may not get some of the more sophisticated detail around it, but they get that human beings depend on water in all its different guises. Another message that was starting to permeate through this was that as a society, we still really don't pay the real cost of some of these big dependencies. We haven't got that right yet, and there were some ideas starting to filter through. I also had a sense that there are still some really key partnerships, ones that perhaps we don't know about yet, that we need to look at. It was a slight surprise to me, perhaps, that the NFU and the CLA are not completely embedded in these conversations. That they were very pleased to be part of the conference, that perhaps it was the norm. It was great to see the water companies represented, those sort of business connections, those different elements of what the water resources mean to us, I think are really key and important for us going forward. The other dose of reality, of course, is that the situation around us is changing in terms of public resourcing. You know, it is changing, it's going down, and I can't see anything different. I'm sure Becky may want to comment further. Public resources are going to continue to go down. That's both a threat for all of us and an opportunity. I'm sure, like me, you in your organisations are looking at, first of all, what are our priorities going forward? We've got to be absolutely much clearer about those going forward. We've got to make some hard choices. But also, what are the opportunities to do things differently? How do we actually start to be much more protective over our patches and start to actually work more collaboratively? And one of the things that struck me across the conference is that there is an awful lot going on. There are different structures, there are different organisations with different evidence bases, different data sets, slightly different objectives. And I think the challenges for us going forward with fewer public resources to support us are how we match those up much better. And I had some quite interesting conversations outside of the general debates about those. And one of those things was, are we doing enough about joining up on our evidence? As we make hard choices about what our operational priorities are in the short term, some of that needs to be informed by what risks we're taking, by perhaps doing some things first and putting things further back onto a longer term horizon. The evidence that enables us to make those judgments is really key. Natural England has an evidence base. We are an evidence-based organisation. We do invest in research. That obviously will be going down. So increasingly we want to make sure that research is well placed. One question for me going away is, how do we join up with AOBs in terms of our evidence base and some priorities we need going forward? Something I haven't really asked myself before. And the last point, and I'm not sure if I'm in the right sort of time zone, Howard, and probably the biggest point for me was that although a lot of the conversations, a lot of presentations would have touched each of you in different ways, some more relevant to some partnerships than others, the thing that I thought and felt unified all of us, and perhaps when you think about which presentations touched you the most, was that collectively we all share a huge emotion, a huge passion about protected landscapes. And I think for me, the presentations that made the most impact were the ones that really touched me and made me feel. And we shouldn't underestimate that one of our biggest tools, all of us, and we've all got that's absolutely universal, is that we all care passionately, we can all share that emotion. And part of that is the trick in terms of how we communicate. So let's always make sure we use all those opportunities to perfect that art of sharing of ourselves and sharing that emotion, because that's what makes us human. That's what I think will stand us, will actually take us forward in a way that is more palpable than our operational plans. So just a very personal reflection on the bits that really made the conference really exciting for me.
Thank you very much, Maddie. Before I hand over to Becky, I just wanted to pick up on one thing that Maddie said and maybe probe it a bit further. We are in an era where the agenda is based around monetising and valuing what we do. One of the things that I noticed particularly is that all the feedback we've had from the field trips relate to something over and above what it is possible to value, which is essentially about that bit that we take forward. So I'm going to ask Maddie, and I don't know if she has an answer for this, how do we ensure that some of these non-quantifiable emotional responses we have to landscape and the job we have in managing that don't slip through the net in an increasingly valued approach to landscape?
For me, the answer is at a very personal level, that it's down to us in terms of the last point I was making. It's about how we communicate. It's about how we share the passion. And that means that we mustn't be shy or selfish with that passion that we feel. And there are actually a lot of us. This isn't a small brigade. We are just the tip of the iceberg of a lot of people who have this joy and passion. And it's also very clear that local communities have that as well. So there's a huge connection, there's a huge energy that we can tap into. And I think we mustn't forget to invest in that side. And that's every interaction we have with every, in our day jobs, is those interrelationships and sharing that passion and not being afraid to do that, as well as the resource prioritisation, the action planning, the operation. We mustn't lose sight of the human side of all this work.
Thank you, Maddie. I'm now going to ask Becky to respond to the first question I asked, which was about common themes, commonality, and generally reflect on the last few days. So, Becky.
Thank you. And thank you, Maddie, as well. We haven't actually pre-scripted this, but I can empathise with a lot of what you said, so thank you. I think that the theme of water was a fantastic one. I learned a lot from the last sort of 2.5 days. I think in a way though it almost doesn't matter what the theme was. The fact is that the AONB community does share a lot of common objectives and has a lot of commonality between each organisation. So I think that's been great to have that theme because it's really brought those common objectives out. The why people want to act and to actually take some action forward is actually often the same. I think a lot of it does come back to that sort of passion and that interest. And the how is often the same as well in terms of that partnership approach. I think the partnership approach is something that AONBs have always led the way on. I think the carrots and not the sticks as well is also something that is done very well in the AONB landscape. But the what and the who can often differ. And by that I mean the what in terms of the specifics, the challenges particular to that landscape, although again there can be common themes. And the who in terms of who sits around the table, who the organisation in question needs to engage with. One organisation that we haven't heard much mention of in the last few days are local enterprise partnerships. They were briefly mentioned, I think, by Andrea at the end of the Q&A session on Monday. But I think local enterprise partnerships are really now growing up to become sort of less of a toddler or baby and more perhaps of a juvenile or teenager. They're really sort of starting to come into the fore. The role for local enterprise partnerships is growing, and it's going to become more so with the growth plans as they come up over the coming weeks and months. So I think they really are not just one to watch now, but if you're not engaging with your local enterprise partnership, then at least to try. Now, what feedback I get the most of is, well, we have tried and they're not interested. Well, I think that's perhaps where DEFRA might be able to play a role there in helping. So we do run quarterly local enterprise partnership meetings. We're getting a tourism subgroup of that sort of has now been established. And I think, yes, tourism is just one way in which you can engage with your local enterprise partnership, but it's actually quite a good way because it can cover lots of different aspects of what it is that you're trying to achieve. So that was just something, an observation that I thought I'd mention. So the challenges and shared objectives often remain the same, but often it does come back to that way in which you communicate. And sometimes I found, certainly within my own organisation, that passion can be a dangerous thing, because sometimes people get so passionate about things, and I've seen this myself in meetings, that they forget to actually speak the language of the people that they're trying to negotiate with and engage with. So I think passion is all important, but it does come back, I think, to an excellent point in Jeff's presentation earlier on today around the sort of passion and practicality versus policy and process. I say versus with a question mark, it doesn't necessarily have to be like that, but it's certainly a lot of the meetings I've observed, it does seem to be like that. And I think there's a huge role there for government to really learn more from the voluntary sector organisations that we do engage with, but perhaps sometimes it is seen as a two-sided, we're about to meet with X organisation and we need to get our point across. Well, I think the understanding more the fact that those two sides aren't two sides, they are fighting for a common and a shared objective, is something that needs to be focused upon. And often it is the language that is used that can help to make that meeting more successful. I think prioritisation as well, again, something else that Maddie have mentioned. It is key. I've had some interesting discussions in the margins of the last 3 days, and prioritisation is often a difficult and thorny issue. But the fact of the matter is that the funding situation at the moment for many OMBs is not as they would want, and I'm afraid that the situation is only going to get worse. Something that Richard Benyon kindly touched on in his speech, but of course didn't go into any more detail on that. The budgets will be established towards the civil service autumn, which I'm told will be September, October time, but we shall see. So I think the kind of pre-thinking for that process is important in terms of what does prioritisation mean to you? Those scant resources that you do have, what do they need to focus upon? And again, we, DEFRA, are very keen to have those discussions with you, and indeed we're looking to set up a meeting with Howard and colleagues at the end of July, early August, to discuss just that. And finally, I think local intelligence and the evidence base is absolutely crucial, and it comes back to those discussions between the public sector, private sector and voluntary sector. I think if the evidence base is not there, if the local intelligence is not sort of gathered together and brought together in that coherent way, then it does make those conversations and meetings actually quite difficult to have. Now, I have had, again, conversations outside in the margins with regards to, well, one person's evidence is another person's conjecture or even imagination. We have lies, white lies and statistics, we well know. But I think the more evidence that is there and the more that it supports the argument or the position that you're trying to put across, the easier those discussions become. And I think I will just draw a line under it there and just thank you all very much for the last 2.5, 3 days. It's been absolutely fascinating, so thank you.
Thank you, Becky. I will, before opening it up to the floor, just come back with one thought which has occurred to me as Becky was speaking. Some of you will be aware that we've just, through the funding of the OMB family, commissioned a report by land use consultants which looks at the value of the OMB partnerships, not the value of the high quality landscapes, but the value of the model. And one of the key messages that came out of that report is that the OMBs have come of age. Now, we've got a lot of wicked problems to deal with, and it would be in keeping with the watery theme to express my concern that AONBs were remembered as the mayfly of the protected landscape world, that no sooner did they come of age but were smitten down by the double whammy of government cuts and local authority spending cuts. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll open it up to the floor to take any questions to both Maddie and Becky. Do we have any questions? We've got Helen beside there.
Hello, my name is Helen Noble. I'm a director on the board for the National Association of AONBs, and I'm actually here as an officer for IUCN. So I first of all want to congratulate all of you for gaining your Category 5 IUCN. So well done. It's a major achievement, and I think something that could be communicated extraordinarily well in the coming months, especially to the understanding of your landscapes to people. And there's a couple of questions I have. One is really with that in mind, and with my hat on with IUCN, I am organising the World Parks Congress, Parks, Peoples, Planets, Inspiring Solutions, which will take place in Sydney between the 12th and 19th of November 2014. I would like to know what you think the AONB family, DEFRA and Natural England could contribute to finding inspired solutions for the challenges that are met with our landscapes, protected areas around the world, not only where we've been today. And as a point of communications, there was a local naturalist, a guy called Ted Ellis, who spoke about the Broads as being breathing spaces for our souls. And I think that's a very relevant comment with this. I think one of the key messages we need to come away from here is the fact that we communicate probably not the right sort of messages. We need to ensure that our landscapes, environment, nature, whatever you want to call it, sits at the heart of what we do and how it impacts on us as beings. It's a very simple message, because without looking after our landscapes, we as people, the fauna and the flora, are in serious trouble. So I think it's how we communicate those messages. And perhaps we're communicating the wrong messages at the moment, and perhaps we ought to start looking at what impacts does the environment have on us as beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Shall I start by passing over to Maddie with two areas, one more generally about World Parks Congress and the other about communication.
I think Helen was sort of just making her own contribution there for the second piece. I don't think that was the question, was it, Helen? Around the communications piece.
Well, I think there is a key message of are we communicating the right messages?
Are we communicating? Yeah. It's interesting because when you ask that question, my personal response is that the question itself almost suggests that we are almost acting as missionaries, with a message that we want to get across. So I think fundamentally there's something about meeting halfway in terms of how we communicate. So I think there's something philosophical actually in terms of about the idea of taking a message to somebody, whether they want to receive it or not. I think there's something about how we meet halfway, how we understand where people are coming from. I think you've heard a lot about that in the conference actually, which is about understanding somebody else's point of view first, thinking about things on their terms, and then trying to sort of share a common area of ground in a very personal way. So I think there's something quite key about communications, which I think some of us do better than others. I think some of the benefit of these sorts of conferences is that we start to identify with the best practice and take away some thoughts about how we can do things better going forwards. The first question about the world parks, I think there are huge benefits in learning from beyond our own understanding of space, and this is what we're doing here. The question is how far, how much can we take that? How much can we afford to take that in the short term? And I suppose the question for me is, what are the risks if we don't invest in that now? Is it something that we can put off because we can't afford it this year, next year? So those are the sorts of questions I would want to be clear about. Is this something we can afford to put off? Is this a worthy investment that actually takes us somewhere a long way down the line?
Thank you, Maddie. I'll give the final word to Becky, wearing aware of the time.
Thank you. I think certainly on the communication point, it is crucial, and it comes back to points that I think Maddie and I have both made already and have been made throughout this conference. And I mean, of course, the strapline, as I'm sure all of you know, for the national parks is Britain's breathing spaces. So, you know, very similar to the point that you made, Helen, in terms of that. And I think there is, I would say, I think further work to be done in terms of collaboration between national parks and AONBs. Now that's something that needs to come from AONBs, needs to come from national parks, but I think in terms of that joint approach there to perhaps yes, communication, but also marketing as well, and sort of helping people to understand what the benefits of our protected landscapes actually are. Yes, it's about well-being, but also it's about the language that you adopt, and that depends on the audience that you've got in question. Now, at the moment, of course, we have a Secretary of State within DEFRA that is very much focused on, well, we have a government as well that is very much focused, of course, on the economic leg of the sustainable development stool. Now, that isn't going to change in the next sort of years, and certainly not by Sydney 2014. So yes, I think well-being is an absolutely crucial point, but I think it can't just be looked at, you know, in solidarity. It does also need to be looked at with the economic and environmental points as well. So I think communication is key, but as part of that, language is a major point of that. And also, Helen, if you want to sort of discuss offline about the role of DEFRA, particularly with regards to the conference in 2014, then more than happy to do so.
Right, thank you very much. I am afraid I see hands at the back, but we're out of time if we're going to keep to schedule. I'd just like to say thank you to both my keynote listeners who evidently listened throughout the last few days, have had very little pre-warning of what was about to be asked, and had very little time to put anything together, but they responded admirably, and I'd like to thank them both. So thank you very much.